chapter 41, your life can change in an instant. And to give you something to ponder as we look at this story today, and as you sometimes put various people on pedestals, I want to give you something to ponder, something that gives this some application for each one of us. Sometimes you look at pastors and their families and you think to yourselves, they've got it all put together. And hopefully that is the case. You've got it all put together. But my family is not immune to the trials that you are going through yourselves. We also live in this world. And we also go through the trials, much like we're going to see with Joseph today. In fact, some of you may already know that my wife has been waiting diligently and praying for a career change. And it hasn't happened yet. And so we are like Joseph in this story. And my wife more so than me. Day after day, after day, after week, after month, waiting. When will God answer? And so, yes, you get to look to various people and say, that is a test, a time of trial. And sometimes even the families fracture, and I'm not here to make my wife feel uncomfortable, but even in our family, we go through trials that you might go through. And so we know what it's like when children rebel and go and do their own thing, so that you wonder where they are and what they're doing. That's for you to ponder this morning as you see God working through people. And so that you don't elevate other people to a position that says they don't go through trials, or they have arrived. We haven't arrived. And I say this so that you learn to share your challenges with each other, so that you don't feel more alone than you already are. Genesis chapter 41. The truth is, your life and mine can change in an instant, with the blink of an eye. God's plans and his timeline have a start and an end. We just don't know it. And when those heavy trials of life cause our faith to grow weak and to falter, we only imagine that every day will be the same as today, and tomorrow will be the same. We only imagine that. And when you start living this way, you stop trusting in God's goodness. And when we stop trusting the Lord for each new morning, when we stop trusting that God sees our season of disappointment, then we stop looking up and we start focusing ourselves on our own problems. I'd like to read part of chapter 41. Now it happened at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he was standing by the Nile. And lo, from the Nile there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed in the marshy grass. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them from the Nile, ugly and gaunt, and they stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. The ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows. And then Pharaoh awoke. He fell asleep and dreamed a second time, and behold, 7 ears of grain came up on a single stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 ears, thin and scorched by the east wind, sprouted up after them. The thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump and full ears. Then Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. Now in the morning his spirit was troubled. So he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt, and all of its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh. Then the chief cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I would make mention today of my own offenses. Pharaoh was furious with his servant and put me in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard, both me and the chief baker. We had a dream on the same night, he and I. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now, a Hebrew youth was with us there, a servant of the captain of the bodyguard, and we related them to him. And he interpreted our dreams for us. To each one he interpreted according to his own dream, and just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me in my office, but he hanged him. Then Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph, and they hurriedly brought him out of the dungeon. And when he had shaved himself, clothed himself in new clothes, he came to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, but no one can interpret it. And I have heard it said about you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph then answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. So Pharaoh spoke to Joseph. In my dream, behold, I was standing on the bank of the Nile. And behold, 7 cows, fat and sleek, came up out of the Nile, and they grazed in the marsh grass. Lo, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt, such as I had never seen for ugliness in all the land of Egypt. And the lean and ugly cows ate up the first 7 fat cows. Yet, when they had devoured them, it could not be detected that they had devoured them, for they were just as ugly as before. Then I awoke. I also saw in my dream, and behold, 7 ears full of good came up on a single stalk. And those 7 ears, withered, thin, and scorched by the east wind, sprouted up after them. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 good ears. Then I told it to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Now Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God has told to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good years are 7 years, and the dreams are one and the same. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 thin ears scorched by the east wind will be 7 years of famine. It is as I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. Behold, 7 years of great abundance are coming in all the land of Egypt. And after them, 7 years of famine will come, and all the abundance will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. And the famine will ravage the land. So the abundance will be unknown in the land because of the subsequent famine, for it will be very severe. Now, as for the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh twice, it means that the matter is determined by God, and God will quickly bring it about. Now let Pharaoh look for a man, discerning and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh take action to appoint overseers in charge of the land, and let him exact 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 years of abundance. Then let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up the grain for food in the cities under Pharaoh's authority, and let them guard it. Let the food become as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which will occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land will not perish during the famine. Now the proposal seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his servants. Then Pharaoh said to his servants, Can we find a man like this, in whom is a divine spirit? So Pharaoh said to Joseph, Since God has informed you of all this, there is no one so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house. And according to your command, all my people shall do homage only. I must have read that wrong. And according to your command, all my people shall do homage. Only in the throne I will be greater than you. Pharaoh said to Joseph, See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took off his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put a gold necklace around his neck. He had him ride in his second chariot, and they proclaimed before him, bow the knee. And he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, though I am Pharaoh, yet without your permission no one shall raise his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh named Joseph, a strange name, and he gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, as his wife, and Joseph went forth over the land of Egypt. That's as far as we will go today. It's a large section. And we should ask for God's help with this. Father, thank you for this section of your word. I ask that you would open our ears to make us discerning, that we might, in fact, come away from this part of Scripture encouraged. In Jesus' name I ask, amen. Amen. In verse 1, now it happened at the end of 2 full years. Right, some of you are already putting this together. God had plans for Joseph that he knew nothing about. The same way God has plans for you that you know nothing about. For poor Joseph, he had spent 11 years as a slave and then thrown in prison. That's 11. And in the last chapter that we saw previously, 2 court officials ended up in the same prison with Joseph, and with the baker and the cupbearer. The Lord gave him the interpretation of the dream. And I wonder, how many days and weeks did Joseph hold out hope after that? Oh, this week they will tell Pharaoh. This week I will be remembered. How long did it take before he stopped hoping? And so I wonder if 2 more years of the same hopeless misery had given Joseph time to give up. 2 more years. Still waiting. No answers. But we know for Joseph, the Bible has a whole story. What about you? You don't even know your whole story yet. Have you grown tired of waiting for the Lord to answer your prayers? Has your season of lament lasted so long that your joy is slowly turning into bitterness? Your 5 or 6 months without work may just feel as soul-crushing as another person's 2 years battling physical ailments. We all have our own. Your 10 years of praying for that rebellious child may cause you to become negative and jaded in spirit. I met someone recently, fantastic older lady, and she said to me, I prayed for my son 40 years. And then I saw that son in church. 40 years. God inclines his favor toward his redeemed children, otherwise known as the word grace. But we use the word a lot, and I don't think we understand what it means. God inclines his favor and blessings upon his redeemed children. But our season of trial must still be prayerfully and faithfully walked through day by day. Still. For Joseph, it would take 13 years before anybody mentioned him to anybody, before he had any hope of getting out. 13 years. Because it's a long section, I will not reread the passages as I talk about them, but I will tell you where I'm at. Okay. So in verses 1 through 8, look at the section there, 1 through 8. It's the first dream, or 2 dreams, really. After 2 years, after the cupbearer was restored to his work before Pharaoh, God gave the ruler of Egypt 2 dreams in succession. He awoke highly troubled in spirit, and this only worsened because nobody could explain it to him. Which is really something and troubling for him, because Egypt was known for its astrologers, its learned men, its magi, right, magicians. It was known for that. The book of interpretations and dreams, and yet they could not give the king, the ruler, an answer. I think God knows how to reach each one of us in our own peculiar way. The kind of way that will get our attention. Different for each one of us. And in ancient Egypt, the Pharaoh was more than just a king. If you don't know this, a little history here. He also served as the voice and the servant of their gods, many gods. Pharaoh represented the gods to his entire nation. He was the spokesperson for the gods, and thus responsible for how the land went, how things went. He was responsible, or seemed to control, the fate of life, the cycles of nature, and all the divine mysteries. And all of a sudden, this person couldn't explain. You see the problem now? He was the quasi-divine ruler, unable to understand his own dream. And no one could help him because God was preventing. Whether or not they even could have, God said no. Remember last week we looked at, if God gives the dreams, who can interpret them? God. In fact, nobody interprets dreams because they are God's property. Don't look elsewhere. And God already had a faithful servant, waiting patiently in Pharaoh's own prison, right there beneath his feet. So you and I need to become more aware that how we behave during our season of trial, our extended seasons of trials, will either make us an important witness for Christ, or that bitterness, that sarcasm, the joylessness will take over, and it will not attract people to Christ. It's a sad day when you sit across from someone who goes to church and says all the right things and realize they are full of bitterness. And you realize how they will infect others and keep them from the truth of the gospel, the beauty of knowing Christ. It's a sad, sad day. Verses 9 through 13 in your text again. This is where the chief cupbearer suddenly has a moment of recollection, because things were looking pretty bad at this point. But his memory returns. He remembers, I spent some time in that jail with that Hebrew. He doesn't remember Joseph's name. Apparently that just faded, but he was a Hebrew slave. He remembered that. He doesn't mention his offense to Pharaoh either. That's probably a smart thing. But he remembers this Hebrew slave interpreted our dreams exactly how they took place. Verse 14 is important. Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph. Finally, a literal glimmer of light for Joseph coming out of the dungeon. Pharaoh calls for him when he no longer expected a change. I'm guessing 13 years is a long time. He was going about his daily business, but the Bible tells us he was diligent and righteous in what he did. And in the same way, God's plans for your life will arrive definitely and exactly according to God's timing. So if you're waiting and wondering, it's God's timing you're waiting for. Verse 15 and 16 Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, but no one can interpret it. And I have heard it said about you, that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Oh, the moment where Joseph could have puffed himself up. You see it, don't you? Well, yeah, actually, I am able to do that. No, you're not. Rightly and humbly does Joseph say, it is not in me. I don't possess the power. It is of God only, and God will answer you. That is the correct answer that we must have. That is how we must be as Christians. But think about this, an unknown Hebrew slave approaching the mighty Pharaoh, the greatest ruler of the empire. Here is an unknown Hebrew slave. Yes, he was bathed and clothed appropriately. I was going to make some joke about fine Egyptian linen with 800 count thread or something. That's where it came from. But the point is, picture the scene. At 17 years old, Joseph is nearly murdered by his brothers, finally sold off into slavery, never to be seen again. He heads to Egypt. He was diligent in his servant duties, but falsely accused for doing everything right. Landed in prison for now many, many more years. Now, a mistreated 30-year-old, see how time passes? A 30-year-old foreign slave is standing in the presence of the supreme ruler of the empire of Egypt. Only God puts these plans together like this. Only God does this. And this is why you and I must learn to trust the Lord. Because it is written, I am going to quote for you, what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, and what no human mind has conceived, the things God has prepared for those who love him. You and I can't conceive of it, and yet God has already put them in play. But the most powerful ruler of that time needed to hear from the Lord. That's what he needed to hear. And for God's plan to take action, he required this Hebrew slave to be standing at this moment in front of this ruler. Because this Hebrew slave is going to fulfill several crucial functions in God's plan. You may not realize in your difficult season that the Holy Spirit may place people in your path that need to hear the gospel, even in your difficult season. Not after, during. For Joseph, this was during, not after. They need to hear the gospel, the good news. The Holy Spirit may need you to demonstrate your true faith daily to the weaker Christian upon whom you have influence because they're watching. So what will you do in your time of trial? People are watching. I mentioned at the beginning, people look at me. People look at my wife. People are watching you. So Pharaoh looks down upon Joseph and states, I have heard it said, you can interpret dreams. I still think that must have been a tempting moment. I mean, having endured 13 years of injustice, tempting moment, but not if you're living with Christ. I am not able to do it. It is God who will give you the answer. And here, I've read this story like you have a lot of times. I've seen it in movies and stuff, cartoons. Right here, I think we think of Moses only, which is 400 years down the road. In this same place, I don't mean the exact temple, but in the same place, 400 years before Moses, the gauntlet is laid down in front of Pharaoh and his gods. Right here. Did you even see it when you read it? In Pharaoh's own palace, in front of all of his religious and learned people, Joseph says, there is one God, and he will tell you what none of your gods and none of your people could tell you. Can you imagine the scene now? Would you have the boldness to stand in front of a ruler and say, look, none of this is going to work for you? Yes, if you're empowered by the Holy Spirit within you, yes, you can. God had prepared Joseph for all of those years, just like he prepared the dream for Pharaoh. Verses 17 through 24, this is, of course, the relaying of the dreams, first time, and they're pretty strange dreams, which, again, I caution you, don't try to imagine you can interpret everybody's dreams. Just don't, okay? But why do you think Pharaoh was so alarmed by these dreams? Was it just the fact that his professional wizards had no answers? Was that it? No, let me actually try to fill in a little history and geography for you. Some of you like this. Some of you just hang on. I like this. The ancient Egyptian calendar was actually based upon the 3 stages of the Nile River. You can look it up. They had 3 seasons: inundation, growth, and harvest. 3 seasons. It's a known thing in history. In fact, they had possibly the first large-scale agriculture of any empire. Large-scale. They studied their climate. They knew how the river worked, more or less. In fact, again, this is really nerdy stuff, but I want to tell you, it's really cool. All along the Nile River, going down, they would dig these stone pits. And inside these pits, they would have measurements. And when they hit a certain measurement, the water would then go on to the next thing. And that told them when it was time to do something in their fields. They were measuring. These were not dumb people by any stretch. So, this study of the climate meant they knew that the early spring rains, which started in the highlands of Ethiopia. Okay, I admit I didn't know there were wet parts of Ethiopia. But there are mountains or highlands there where it does rain a lot for one season in the spring. It now flows down the Blue Nile, 900 miles. And then it meets up with the White Nile, which comes from Lake Victoria, a whole different place. They meet together, and from that point they flow 900 more miles through Egypt. That's a long ways, isn't it? And when they do that, they overflow the banks. The Egyptians relied on this inundation, this flood. They would have it May through August. They needed it. So what they did is called basin irrigation, I think is the technical term. If I had a cool board, I would show you this stuff, okay? Mm-hmm. So they would build basins, holding tanks as it were. And when the water's flooded, it would capture a lot of this water. And then they would build levees, walls, retaining walls, all along their fields. And then they would open up the water from the basin and they would flood the field about 4 feet deep. And it would sit there for about 45 days, allowing the earth to be saturated with water and all the fertile sediment to settle in as fertilizer. And when that was ready, they'd open the next one and let it go through to the next field, all the way down. Yes, highly complex, very important River Nile. They grew large amounts of wheat, barley, flax, and papyrus, which was used for more than just writing. And of course, they used the Great River Nile system to transport goods all over the place. Very important. Now, I tell you all this so that you think I'm very, very smart. I tell you all this because in the dream, Pharaoh is standing by the Nile, so that you understand why this is so troubling to King Pharaoh. The Nile is their lifeblood. It does everything for their culture and society. In fact, it was deified. So, now we come back. It was so crucial. He's standing by the river. From the river, showing fertility, showing produce, come 7 fat cows. All right, that looks good. He got that. Good things coming. It was providing cows, which were also symbolic of fertility to them. They worshipped a lot of things like cows. But the two dreams are one dream, repeated twice, with different symbols. The fat, juicy cows and the large ears of grain were clear indications of prosperity. According to God, the land would enjoy 7 years of maximum abundance. But the next 7 years, almost metaphorically, would eat up any memory of those good years. So bad would it be, nobody would remember how good it was. How bad is that? That's bad, right? What I find interesting about our account is that it actually matches actual history about the practices at the time. This matches. So if somebody wants to say the Bible's made up, they're just stories that have been pieced together, this whole section matches history. This is how they lived. This is the reality of what was going on. These aren't just stories. Nobody could piece together so many stories and make them all accurate to the place and to the time and culture and climate. It's not possible. But what I found interesting, it talks about an east wind in here. Did you see it in your notes? There's the gaunt, the thin-looking wheat, and then this east wind comes and scorches it. It says it in the text. Small detail, except it's an actual detail. It still takes place today in Egypt. In fact, in several parts of the Sahara area. I looked it up. There's some fantastic pictures. It looks like the end of the world. These pictures, you might have seen them in movies. There are these east winds that come up periodically, especially in the spring, called Hamzin. There's a K and an H in there, Hamzin. And they arrive unannounced, driving gigantic clouds of dust and sand. I think Las Vegas, every once in a while, gets one of these. And Australia, gigantic, towering clouds that arrive and hang out for hours over places. They come with 90-mile-an-hour winds. And so the sand acts as an abrasive, scours all the young, tender plants, and takes away the fertile soil. In fact, it is so dramatic that even in the winter, the dry, hot winds from these events raise the temperature in winter to over 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Devastating. So I tell you this because it matches. Even then they knew, and here it is recorded. It's real history. Well, verses 33 through 36, again, we're just moving on here. I like this part. Now let Pharaoh, this is Joseph talking, let Pharaoh look for a man discerning and wise. How many opportunities do you get to give to create your own resume for somebody? So here's what I'm like. This is what you need. I don't think he was actually doing that. I think he was saying, look, God is still talking to Joseph. This is the way out of this. And you need to do this, Pharaoh. It's really something. I imagine, again, I wasn't there, Pharaoh, this supreme ruler, must have been in some state of shock because he allowed this slave now to continue beyond the dream interpretation to make very big suggestions. Not normal. not at all normal. Who are you to tell me, Pharaoh, what to do? God's in charge. That's why. In some of my research on, and this is the last bit of my research for you, in some of my research on ancient Egyptian agriculture, it stated the Nile inundation effect could provide food for anywhere from 2 to 12 million people. So ancient Egyptian empire, not today, way back, 2 to 12 million people could be sustained because of this. So some of you are math whiz. Permit me to exercise my unorthodox math skills. You can challenge me later, and I'll be happy to accept it. But for 7 years, it says they would need to collect 1/5 of the abundance. This is where you'll see how bad my math is. 1/5 of the abundance, which to me looks like 20% times 7 years. If I use the lowest figure of 2 million people sustained by this inundation, I get enough stored for 14 million people over that 7-year period. Right? Well, the math works in my mind. God's plan ensured there would be enough grain to easily feed this nation at its lowest level during the 7 years of famine. Because it could sustain 2 to 12 million people, and now they have enough for 14. It works for me. I can see God doing something that wouldn't be possible, but it required, for this success, one person to rule over all the resources, several regional overseers, and building structures to house and guard the grain. So in 37 to 38, this is the proposal seemed good to Pharaoh. Again, this is so surprising if you look at the context. Who are you? It's God speaking. The proposal was in fact good. And then he says to his servants, can we find a man like this? Why did none of them jump up and say, yes, me? Wouldn't this have been the supreme position? Of course not. This was God's plan. This is why I've told you at the beginning, whatever your season is right now, has been, don't forget you're part of God's plan. Like Joseph. Pharaoh rightly says, look, God spoke through Joseph. I'm going to assume God can still speak through Joseph. So he's our man. This means he has trusted. Talking about Pharaoh. This means Pharaoh has trusted the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Has he not? Not his own God. Right here, he had to make a very dramatic decision. All these gods, all the priests that were watching, listening, I will trust this one. 39 through 45, again, this is all we're going to cover today. So Pharaoh says to Joseph, since God has informed you of all this, there is no one so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house. You can read it carefully, look at the details. He looks at them and reasons, okay. And this is why I started the message with your life can change in an instant. 1 second, Joseph was down there in the dungeon, doing what he was doing. The next second, he's pulled out in a hurry, it said. And now, something else changes. Now, Pharaoh says, you will be the second in command. Again, imagine the empire. Huge empire of Egypt. Second in command over everything except the throne. He's very clear. Everything. No one lifts a foot. And he says, in fact, I'm going to give you your own chariot. And with runners, depending on your translation, I like the runners. Runners go ahead and say, hail, here comes Joseph, bow down, here he comes. Imagine. He was given a signet ring. Remember we talked about a signet ring? I got some cool pictures. when we edit the video, I'll put them into the sermon. A signet ring, literally it could have been a ring with a tablet, stone, whatever you want, that was engraved. And so when you push that into clay or even wax, it would show the imprint, and this one belonged to Pharaoh. This was Pharaoh's authority and his bank account, given to this Hebrew slave. This nobody that God said is somebody. Amazing. It's not even possible, the story. And then there's another detail which we'll look at next week, but this idea that he was, to seal the deal, he's given a wife from the priestly class. And if you were to study, I think the Indian culture and some of the Buddhist cultures and Hindu cultures, you would find that the priestly caste is at the very top of the social status. That's where you would want to be. So if it wasn't enough that he's second to Pharaoh, he's also now been thrown into the upper class. You can't get any higher for Joseph. It really is amazing. In the New Testament, as the Apostle Paul is preaching Jesus Christ, he reminds his Jewish audience in Acts chapter 7 of their heritage and God's plans. He uses this, and this is Paul, New Testament, long time later. Acts chapter 7, verse 9, he says the patriarchs became jealous of Joseph, his brothers, the patriarchs, and sold him into Egypt. Yet God was with him and rescued him from all his afflictions and granted him favor and wisdom in the sight of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and made him governor over Egypt and his entire household. Paul knew his history. And he knew that if God is with you, then you are not forgotten. And you are in God's plans. So back to our theme of enduring our season of difficulty. And I'm sorry, if somebody here, you're like in the best season of your life, save this sermon. Okay? Because one day you won't be. And let me just add, if you're in a season where life is good, as a believer, and that's great, that happens, then you look for those who are in a difficult season. If you don't have stress, if your finances are good, if your kids are great, if whatever, if your health is good, go look for those who are having a tough time. Be that encouragement. How will you and I go through another day waiting for that job to finally show up, or that boss to go somewhere else? How will you wait another day for financial peace? The bills are just always there. How will you keep a joyful heart when your children are living in rebellion? How will you do that? How will you keep from bitterness when your family has been fractured for years and many have walked away from the Lord? James, the brother of Jesus, who would be martyred, he would be killed for his faith. He writes in James chapter 1 to consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. And let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. And if any lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt. Because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. The person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. Now, I admit to you that this finding joy during the trials, while you and I are suffering through them, seems pretty improbable. My guess is it's because we're so focused on the pain, the frustration, that we can't see God's purposes beyond our present problems. James could say what he did because his interest was in his future life, in the presence of his Creator. James suffered But his was a much less self-focus and more Christ-focus. And let me tell you, without any seasons of distress, our faith would be weak. Here's an example, and I'm almost finished, so just hang with me. It's an example from nature, from trees. If you plant a tree, they will always tell you, make sure you put a stake with it, a little sapling, put a stake there so when the wind blows, it doesn't blow over. What they don't tell you is you need to remove the stake 6 months later. Do you know why? Because I forgot to tell you, or they didn't know. If you leave the stake there, the tree will never get strong. It will rely on the stake, the pole. Because every time the wind blows, the tree, however it's made, understands that it needs to strengthen that side of the trunk for the wind. So you take the stake away, and every time the wind blows, every time the trials come, the tree gets stronger. And that's why you have trees out here that are 100 and 200 years old that were never staked. And there they are, strong. So, without any seasons of distress, our faith would be weak. Little more than a sentiment, really. But hardly that determined trust that is born out of long periods of difficulty. And this is why you and I admire believers who have lived through difficult seasons. We do. We admire them. We have books probably from some of them. But that end result that you admire, that you want, that God requires, that true faith is born out of trials. Our faith is shaped when things are not going well. Our faith needs to trust God's plans, even when they're not obvious, and definitely when they're not easy. So how do we do this? Let me tell you in 4 easy sentences, short sentences. You and I need a deep reliance upon prayer. We've got to talk to our Creator. Talk to the Lord. You and I need daily time in His Word, from which we get encouragement and instruction. And you will see God's character through the pages of the Bible. And we need, and this is why I started the way I did, we need the compassion of our Christian community. Because this is who we have right now that Christ comes in. These priorities will prove Hebrews 13:5, where God says, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. Amen.
Amen.